The Bhagavad Gita is often said to criticize the Vedas. It's also said that it upholds the Vedas. So which one is true? Does the Bhagavad Gita promote Vedas, Vedic culture, Vedic rituals, Vedic ceremonies, havans? Or does the Bhagavad Gita reject all this? Does the Bhagavad Gita say that we should not follow the Vedas, but we need to go beyond them? Which one is true? Which one is correct? In fact, the criticism of the Vedas is found in the Vedas themselves, because the latter part of the Vedas, which deal primarily with Vedanta, are said to be critical of the Vedas. For those who are interested, you might want to read my article on Does Vedanta criticize the Vedas? To understand this in context, we have to know that at the time the Bhagavad Gita was spoken, there were a huge number of disparate, diverse religions that were prevalent at that time. And there were religions that promoted worldliness, and there were religions that promoted other worldliness. By worldliness, I mean the Karma Kanda philosophy recommended that one follow the Vedas, perform all the Vedic rituals, do your duties, and having engaged in all these activities, you would gain good karma, which would be stored in what is called the Ishtapurta, and that would entitle you on leaving this body to go to heaven or Swarg. And having gone to Swarg and enjoyed heavenly delights in Swarg, you would then, when your credit is exhausted, be reborn. But because of all the Vedic karmas and rituals and ceremonies that you have performed, you would be reborn in a superior family, a more aristocratic family, a more socially prominent family. You would be born in a body which is more beautiful than the one you had in the previous birth. You would also be born in a much wealthier family than you were born in the previous birth. And you would be born and you would acquire great knowledge. So having acquired all these wonderful benefits, you would once again perform Vedic karmas and rituals and ceremonies so that the cycle would be repeated. And thereby you would enter onto an ascending spiral, an ascending staircase to higher birth, better looking body, wealthier family, and more aristocratic family, more knowledgeable and learned. And this ascent would eventually take you to the highest position that is available within the material planets. But what does Krishna think about that? Krishna has a different view. Krishna very clearly says that those who are interested in following this path of material enhancement through the performance of Vedic ritual are people of small intelligence. They are indeed people who are not destined to become free from this cycle of birth and death. So therefore, in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, when you come to, shall we say, text 42 to text 43, you will find Krishna giving direct and outright condemnation of the Vedas. And in this verse, these verses, Krishna says, Yam imam pushpitam vacham pravadantya vapashyatah vedavadarataha partha nanyadastiti vadinah kamatmana swargapara janma karma phala pradhan kriya vishesha bahulam bhoga ishwarya gatim prati. Those with limited understanding get attracted to the flowery words of the Vedas, which will recommend all kinds of ostentatious ceremonies and rituals for elevation to the heavenly planets, and presume nothing higher is described therein. And many of these priests, they glorify only those portions of the Vedas that please the senses, give pleasure, power, position, ego gratification, ego aggrandizement. And thus they perform these Vedic ceremonies, many of them elaborate, for attaining a higher birth, wealth, more enjoyment, and elevation to heavenly planets. And having said this, he then condemns it outright. In chapter 2, text 44, he says, Bhoga Ishwarya Prasaktanam Tayaparta Chetasam Vyavasayatmika Buddhi Samadho na Vidyate. Those people whose minds are deeply attached to pleasures of the senses and whose intelligence is bewildered by enjoyment, such people are never able to have that kind of determination that is required for proceeding on the path that leads to union with God. You see, the Vedas consist of several sections, consists of the, that part of the Vedas that talks about Vedic ceremony and ritual. The one part of the Vedas deals with notable prayers that are recited to the Lord. There are other parts of the Vedas that are dedicated to knowledge and so on and so forth. But if you focus on that part of the Vedas that deals primarily with movement in this cycle of birth and death, have a good life here, go to heaven, and then be reborn here again in a better family with more wealth, more beautiful body, more enjoyment, and more intelligence. But all that deals with this world. And while it deals with this world, it doesn't deal with crossing beyond the cycle of birth and death. So Krishna says that these Vedas, which they are describing and reciting and promoting, they only deal with the gunas of Prakriti. They do not deal with Purush. They do not deal with the spirit. And in verse 45, he says, Traigunya Vishaya Veda, Traigunya Bhavarjuna, Nirdvandvo Nitya Sattvasto, Niryoga Kshem Atmavan. O Arjuna, the Vedas deal with the three gunas. They deal with Prakriti. But you are not Prakriti. You are Purush. You are not material nature. You are the spirit. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego. These are all parts of Prakriti. And the Vedas only teach you how to enhance these manifestations of Prakriti, which are composed of the three gunas. But you are not Prakriti, you are Purush. Aparayam itastvanyam prakritim vidime param jiva bhutam mahabhao yayedam dharyate jagat. You are not part of my Prakriti, which is my separated inferior energy, but you are part of my superior energy. You are part of Purush. And because you are Purush, because you are spirit, all this will not benefit you. Instead, he says, become free from dualities. Detach yourself from Prakriti. Become eternally fixed in the truth. And without concern for the material things of the world, the material fruits of the world, material gain and safety, be situated entirely on the spiritual platform. And Krishna points out that don't think that what I am teaching you does not contain the Vedas. What I am teaching you, Krishna tells Arjuna, is so all-encompassing that after I have told you my message, there will be nothing more to be known, material or spiritual. And therefore he says, Yavan artha udapane sarvatah samplutudake tavan sarveshu vedeshu brahmanasya vijanatah. So whatever purpose is fulfilled by a small well of water is also naturally served in all respect by a great body of water, like a huge lake. Similarly, one who realizes God, one who is one with Brahman, one who is situated on the spiritual platform, one who realizes the absolute truth, one who attains union with God, he indeed fulfills all the purposes of the Vedas. So criticism that the votaries of the Vedas and their sacrifices worship lesser gods, attain the perishable, and re-enter the cycle of birth and death is not just found in the Bhagavad Geeta. It is found in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad and many other Upanishads as well. The Mundaka Upanishad speaks of Vedic sacrifices or ceremonies as frail rafts on which inferior karma devoid of knowledge rests. And the performers of these Vedic rituals are conceited in their ignorance, and they are simply blind men leading the blind. In fact, some parts are even more savage. The Rig Veda says that the repetitions of the priests around the Soma bowl is compared to the croaking of frogs around a pond after the rains arrive. And the Chandogya Upanishad, which is even more insulting and savage on Vedic priestly ritual, describes those who study the Vedas as dogs. And it describes these dogs then sit around the fire on behalf of other dogs, calling out, Om, let us eat, Om, let us drink. May Varuna, Savitri, and Prajapati bring food here, Om. So similarly, in the same tradition, you find here in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna directly condemns those who follow the Vedas for material benefits. In fact, Krishna believes that the knowledge of the Vedas is but a drop in the ocean to those who know God. And he calls on Arjuna in the verses which I have described to avoid fools who speak flowery words from the Vedas but have their hearts distorted by material desires. And he tells Arjuna that he should transcend the Vedas. He should instead transcend Prakriti and he should move on. In fact, the real message given by Krishna is in text 47, verse 47 of the second chapter. This verse is the most popularly quoted verse of the Bhagavad Gita. But it's not quoted in context. I want you to understand this verse in context of what has already been discussed. And Krishna says here, Karmanyevadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phala hetur bhur mate sangostu akarmani. You have a right to perform your Vedic duties and rituals, but you are not entitled to the fruits of your action. Heard that? Karmanyevadhikaraste doesn't only mean work, it means Vedic ritual, which has been discussed up till now. That you have a right to do your Vedic duties and rituals, but you are not entitled to the fruits of those Vedic rituals, which is heaven, better birth, better body, more wealth, more intelligence. You are not entitled to those fruits. You have to perform them as a duty. And therefore, you must perform your prescribed duties, which includes the Vedic rituals, which are in fact the Vedic rituals. Don't consider that you are performing these rituals, because these rituals are being performed by your Prakriti, that your physical body, your mind, and your intelligence are performing these duties, not you, the spirit. So as long as you understand that you are not doing these duties, that your Prakriti is doing the duties, you will understand that you are not the doer. And also, you will understand that you have to perform these Vedic karmas or duties. You cannot escape them. And he tells Arjun, Yogastha kuru karmani sangam tyaktva dhananjaya siddhya siddhyo samo bhutva samatvam yoguchyate. Perform your duties, perform your Vedic karmas, perform your physical duties in the world, and perform them without attachment to success or failure. For after all, the equanimity of mind is the definition of yoga. Yoga is nothing but attaining equanimity of mind. So what do we learn from this? We learn from this that it is not the Vedic ceremonies or the rituals that are to be abandoned, but it is the belief that you are doing them and the belief that you are benefiting from them. When it is your Prakriti that is performing these activities, and not only it is your Prakriti that performs the activities, but indeed it is your Prakriti that takes birth and rebirth. It is your attachment to this Prakriti that forces the individual soul to take birth and rebirth. So bring about your identification with Purush and separate yourself from identifying with Prakriti. So in fact, it's important for you to understand that Krishna describes the Vedas to condemn those who perform the Vedic rituals for the purpose of attaining fruit. Whereas he wants you to continue performing these rituals, which is your duty and your right. Karmanyevadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachan. Ma karma phala heturbhur mate sangostva karmani. And so he goes on and he, in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Geeta, Krishna very clearly points out that you cannot even maintain your body. You cannot even maintain your body if you do not perform your yajna. According to the Vedas, everybody needs to perform these sacrifices, because through the performance of sacrifice, one pleases the gods, the devtas. And these devtas in turn fulfill your material needs. So Indra will give you rain. Without rain, nothing is possible. And to propitiate Indra, one performs Vedic ritual. This is also described in the Bhagavad Gita. And Krishna says very clearly, Niyatam kuru karmatvam karma jayo hiya karmanaha sharira yatrapi chate na prasiddhyeda karmanaha. You must do your Vedic duties because action is superior to inaction. If you don't, in fact, perform your Vedic ceremonies, then the gods will not sustain you, they will not maintain you. And therefore, your body itself will be difficult to continue. But don't do your karmas, don't do your Vedic karmas, don't do your Vedic rituals or ceremonies for the sake of the fruit. He's already pointed out that in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Yagnarthat karmano nyatra loko yam karma bandhana tadartham karma kaunteya mukta sanga samachara. All your activities, even your Vedic karmas, must be performed as a sacrifice to please God. Otherwise, the work that you perform within this world binds you to Prakriti and therefore creates bondage. creates karma, creates rebirth, creates continued suffering. But the same yajna, when it is performed in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion to God, without expecting anything in return, as a duty and as a sacrifice, this indeed will purify you. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that Kayena Manasa Buddhaya Kevalair Indriyerapi Yogana Karma Kurvanti Sangam Tyakpa Atma Shuddhe. Even yogis, they perform their karmas, they perform their duties, they perform Vedic ritual. And to that end, they use their mind, their intelligence, their limbs, their senses. And they do it to purify themselves. In fact, it's very important to understand that the real purpose of the Vedas is to prepare and qualify the individual for reunion with God. Performing Vedic sacrifice over a lifetime requires intense self-discipline. The sonorous chanting of the Vedic mantras, the hypnotic flickering of the flames, the scent of aromatic herbs, the stupefying heat, all still the mind of the seeker and help him to transcend his physical body. Memorizing and chanting extensive sacrificial mantras with the perfect intonation and cadence and rhythm, and wrestling with the meaning of these mantras stills the mind and tranquilizes the intellect. Criticisms are not of the Vedas, but criticisms are of those who cling to the Vedas without understanding that the ultimate purpose of Vedas is to bring about stilling of the mind, silencing of the intellect, and uniting you with God. Swami Chandrasekhar Saraswati, the legendary pontiff of Kanchi Mutt, in a beautiful analogy, compares the Vedas to a flower and Vedanta to the fruit. There can be no flower without the fruit. And yet, unless the flower wilts and falls off, the fruit cannot develop and mature. Thus, the Vedas lead to purification and Vedanta leads to annihilation of the self and reunion with God. So you will see that in chapter 3, Krishna continues and he simply insists that Vedic karma should be performed. He describes the entire process. Saha yagna praja srishtva puravocha prajapati anena pravishadevam eshavo ashtavishta kamaduk. At the beginning of creation, Brahma created humankind with their duties and Vedic karmas. And he created also the Devatas. And he says, perform these yajnas because through these yajnas, humans will nourish the gods and the gods will be nourished. And therefore they will nourish the humans. Devan bhavayate nena te deva bhavayantu vaha parasparam bhavayantaha shreya param avapsyatah. So by your sacrifice, the Devatas will be pleased, and by cooperation with humans and the Devatas, great prosperity will reign for all. Ishtan bhogan hi wo deva dasyante yagna bhavitah tair dattan apradayebhyo yo bhunkte stena evasa. The Devatas, being satisfied by the performance of yajna, will grant you all the desired necessities of life. But those who enjoy what is given to them without making offerings in return, Such people are verily thieves. Yagna shishta shene santo muchante sarva kilvishay bunjate tetva agham papah ye pachantya atma karanat. Those who eat food which is first offered in sacrifice to the gods are released from sin, whereas those who cook food only for their enjoyment, they eat only sin, Krishna says. Annad bhavanti bhutani parjanyad anna sambhava yagnad bhavati parjanyo yagna karma samudbhava. All living beings live on food. Food is produced by rains. Rains come from the performance of Vedic sacrifice. And Vedic sacrifice is performed after doing your prescribed duties. So you perform your prescribed duties in the world, your Swadharma. You worship the gods, and the gods being worshipped will produce rain. And that rain will nourish the crops and produce food which human beings will eat. Karma brahmodbhavam vidhi brahma akshara samudbhavam tasmat sarva gatam brahma nityam yagne pratishtitam. So the duties for humans are described in the Vedas. The Vedas are manifested by God himself. And therefore the all-pervading Lord is eternally present in all acts of Vedic ritual and sacrifice. Evam pravartitam chakram nanu vartiyatiha yaha aghayor indriyaramo mogham partha sajivati. Those who do not accept the responsibility in the cycle of sacrifice established by the Vedas are sinful. They live only for the delight of their senses. Indeed, their lives may be said to be in vain. So, Krishna, does he criticize the Vedas? Yes. He criticizes the Vedas when following the Vedas is done primarily for the fruit. Does he promote the Vedas? Yes. He declares very clearly that it is through the performance of the Vedas that the material world runs. That to do your duty and to perform Vedic ritual and sacrifice are the means by which this universe functions. So, he declares that Vedic sacrifice to appease the Devas must be performed without any desire for the fruit, with the full understanding that Krishna is the ultimate recipient of all sacrifice. Anyone who does not do so lives a life of sin and is a thief. So, indeed, even after you have realized God, like King Janaka did, he continued to perform his duties as a king. He continued to perform Vedic rituals and sacrifice because he set an example for the rest of the world to follow. We've already covered Ishopanishad. And in the Ishopanishad, I pointed out that those who pursue the perishable alone go into great darkness. Those who pursue the imperishable alone go into even greater darkness. But those who pursue the perishable and imperishable side by side, like the two wings of a bird, are happy in this world and the next. So the entire philosophy of Sanatana Dharma is one of inclusion and balance. It is not Vedas opposed to Vedanta. It is not the perishable against the imperishable. It is not the Devatas conflicting with the one Supreme Lord. It is not Advaita versus Dvaita. Each of these has their unique value and place in the eternal balance of the universe. So I'll conclude here. If you have any questions, please go ahead and I'll see if I can answer them.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the amazing wisdom. There's one question from the audience which you have sort of answered, but like I'll ask nevertheless. So, what is the message on food in the Bhagavad Gita? What should we eat or not eat, and how?
That's a full subject in itself, perhaps. I have already taken it in the past. If necessary, I can refresh it sometime in the future. But essentially, food is eaten for the maintenance of the soul. And this food is classified into sattva, rajas, and tamas according to the qualities of that food. And sattvic food, which is offered to God in a spirit of devotion and renunciation, and which is blessed by God, becomes a sacrament. And when we partake of that sacrament, when we eat that food which has been blessed by God, then that purifies us. So therefore, Krishna points out here, Yagne shishta shine santo muchante sarva kilvishay bhunjate te tva agam papam ye pachante atmakatna. So, before you eat, before you drink a drop of water, before you eat a grain of rice, offer it with love and with devotion to God. And God, He blesses it. Indeed, He pervades everything, so He consumes it. And when we eat that food which has been blessed by God, which is indeed a sacrament, it becomes a sacrifice that makes us sacred as well. And to make your body sacred, to make your mind sacred, to make your intellect sacred, it must be nourished by food which has been made into a sacrament by offering it to God. Patram pushpam phalam toyam yo madbhakta prachati tadaham bhakti uparitam ashnami pratatmanaha. A leaf, a flower, a fruit, a little bit of water, if it's offered to me with love and devotion, Krishna says, I partake of it. Well, I've tried to answer it in brief. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you, sir, for answering the question. And there's one more question. Which comes first, the Bhagavad Gita or Vedas, and is one considered a sub-study of the other?
Vedas, of course, are the most ancient. Unlike other books that begin with the prophet, that begin with some form of teacher, the Vedas are aparusheya, which is they are without a human author. They begin at the beginning of creation. Just like if you receive a microwave oven, you'll receive a booklet on how to operate that microwave oven. When God created the universe, He created the Vedas. And those Vedas were to teach you how to live within this world. And these Vedas were passed on from word of mouth, from disciple, from teacher to disciple, from father to son. And thus, nobody ever wrote them down until perhaps 5,000 years ago when they began to write them down because human memory had begun to fail. So definitely, without doubt, Vedas come first. And the Bhagavad Gita, which draws the best of the Vedas, or shall I say the best of the Upanishads from the Vedas, is much later with the incarnation of Krishna. So it can be dated to the incarnation of Krishna. So Vedas come first, Bhagavad Gita comes later.
Thank you, sir, for answering the question. There's one last question. Is Lord Krishna mentioned anywhere in the Vedas?
Yes, he is mentioned in the Vedas as Devaki Putra Krishna.
Okay, sir. Thank you for answering the question. That's all we have for today.
All right. Hari Om. Jai Shri Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, sir.